Hello everyone and welcome to Football Fever, covering all things AFL. We will cover all the major topics, news, injuries and previews. We will also have some deep discussion and heavy debates along the way.
Well, I'm Clinton, and since this is our first ever episode, I think we should give you all a little background on ourselves. We're three blokes from Victoria, still currently in high school. We have Giles, Nick and myself, three boys who have loved and followed footy for as long as they can remember. Over the course of our podcast, we also try and get some special guests in along the way, but you will just have to tune in and keep listening to find out more on the game.
Now that we've covered all of this, it's time to start talking about the footy. Today's Anzac Day, which means we had the big Collingwood and Essendon clash today, but in saying that, we also remember that today is not just about the footy, but it's also to pay respect to our soldiers who fought for us.
Today we kicked off the round with another big Anzac Day game, the Bombers and the Pies.
Oh, well, it was a ripper of a game, wasn't it, boys? Where do we start about the game? Where was the game won and lost?
Well, I think Collingwood had majority of the domination to the second and the third, but I thought the Bombers were good to come back and they really fought hard in the last. I thought they may have won it when Stanton kicked that goal, but then the goal sneak and the soccer goal by Blair got Collingwood the win.
Well, do you think that the Blair goal was controversial and he actually touched it with his hand, or do you reckon it just went through?
Well, with the video footage, wasn't really conclusive. At the end of the day, there's not much you can do about that sort of thing. If the ball was touched, it would have been clear to the goal umpire, and he didn't say it was, so nothing to be settled there.
It was a game of so many ifs and buts. What if Joe Watson didn't play on? What if he let Zaharakis kick it? What if Leroy Jetta didn't let it go out and he got the throw in and got the opportunity to score a quick goal from the ruck?
Yeah, well, I suppose you can look at it that way, but when you got an MCG with 90,000 people, you got less than a minute to go, you need a score even just to draw the game. The players obviously weren't in that mindset to think about that, and I think that sort of reflected in the quick decision making.
Well, if that play had worked out, rolled it back in, somebody picked it up, kicked the goal, it would have looked like an absolute hero. It's just a risk that you just got to take, and sometimes they pay off, sometimes they don't.
Yeah, well, I think with Collingwood, when the ball gets thrown in from the boundary line, they lock the ball in, and we've shown that in the forward press. They lock it in, and it's very hard for opposition teams to score, and I think in knowing that, Essendon would have tried to play on and try and exploit their defence, and unfortunately it just didn't work, and Collingwood picked up the chocolates by a point.
You gotta love the Anzac Day game. It almost feels like it's a grand final match. Just there's so much hype and everybody's talking about it. It's a great game.
Yeah, well, like they say, the second biggest game behind the grand final. Hard to disagree. I mean, there's no greater feeling than Anzac Day, and it was really shown in probably one of the best matches, if not the best we've seen of the year so far.
Yep, I'll agree with you there.
Our next game of the round is set to be another good game between Fremantle and Carlton at Patterson Stadium.
Yeah, I reckon it's going to be a real good game. No Sandilands is going to be a really big out, though, I reckon, for Freo. Yeah,
without Sandilands, I think they're really going to struggle. I think they've got young Zach Clark in. He's probably not a bad ruckman, but the odds seem pretty good there. I know it is over in Perth, but Carlton with the speedsters, I think they should get away with it.
I do like Zach Clark, though. He's very athletic, can take a mark, quick, covers the ground really well.
Yeah, well, he's probably one of the unluckiest ruckmans in the competition. Having the senior ruckman in Sandilands probably doesn't get enough game time as he should, but I think he's developing. I think he'll probably end up being one of the ruckmen of the modern era.
Yep, I definitely agree with you there. Where do you reckon Carlton can get on top of Freo?
Oh, I think speed. I think Carlton are one of the quickest teams in the competition. You look at how they get the ball off the half-back line, you look at guys like Yarran and Garlett, they just spread so quickly, and I think they could really exploit Fremantle and go forward and really hurt them with their speed.
How do you think Freo have gone?
Well, pretty impressive start to the year. They've, I think, won a few wins under Ross Lyon. I think very positive. I thought last year they weren't really that bad considering their absolutely horrible run of injuries, but Freo have been a good side in the last couple of years, and I think they'll certainly be a top 8 team this year.
Yeah, they did have a very bad run with injuries, so it's good to see them having squad's fairly fit at the moment. Five's a bit, but he's a very good player, and I'm sure he'll be able to recover from it soon.
Then we have GWS and the Bulldogs playing up at Monica Oval.
Well, Bulldogs are obviously very clear favourites for this game, as most teams coming up against GWS will be, but they haven't been too bad this season.
Yeah, well, look, I mean, GWS had an excellent start to the year. I know it was one of their games, I think it's North Melbourne, they sort of just got blown away, but I thought last week, less than 5 goals to go down at Amy Stadium to Adelaide. I thought that was a tremendous effort by the GWS boys, and they're just all so young, and I think they're only going to get better week by week.
Yeah. Well, it's the President's Cup, I believe. I could be wrong, but it's the President's Cup match, playing for the cup for, basically Julia Gillard. Does she really deserve a cup?
Yeah, well, I don't know about Julia Gillard. I think that now that Barry Hall's left the game, I don't know if she'll still be interested, but it will certainly be interesting to see. I think Bulldogs are probably one of the... I know their season hasn't really been reflective, but in terms of contested ball, they're one of the best teams I've seen. They even games when they get smashed, they're still hard at the footy, and I think that's a reflection of their coach in Brenton McCartney.
Well, when you get a player like Matty Boyd playing in your midfield, he's just a clearance machine. I really like him. I rate him. He's one of the best midfielders in the competition.
Yeah, well, I mean, GWS will give him a tough fight, but I think Bulldogs probably by about 35 points.
Yeah.
On the topic on the Suns takes us to our next match between the Kangaroos and the Suns at Etihad Stadium.
Well, Kangaroos, a bit disappointing last week, I thought. I thought they went into the game against Swans with a real good chance and real good opportunity to have a good win, but Swans have just proved why they're one of the best teams in the competition. But I don't think they'll have many problems with this match, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, well, I thought they were disappointing last week. I thought they should have been better than what they were, but in saying that, the week before they did knock off the reigning premiers, so I mean, they're a bit if and go, the Kangaroos. I know they lost their first match, kick after the siren, probably another win they could have had, but, $1 to $15, I mean, how can't you back them?
They are crazy odds, though. It is crazy. $1.01 to $15. You don't see them odds very often.
Yeah, well, I don't think I've ever seen a margin of odds $14. It is absolutely crazy.
Like you bet $10 on Kangaroos to win 10 cents.
Yeah, well, that's it. I don't think there'll be too many bets put on that unless they're put on the Gold Coast boys.
Yep.
Then we go to the G for the Melbourne and Saints clash.
Well, poor old D's haven't exactly had the dream start to the season.
Yeah, well, I feel for Mark Neal. I think he's probably had one of the most, if not the worst, start to a season so far. Absolutely smashing after smashing. It's pretty disappointing. I think St Kilda will be very strong and should win comfortably there.
Well, there was a few positives out of last week. It wasn't like... They're slowly getting better. Like, that game against the Eagles, they were extremely it didn't even look that they were trying. And Mitch Clark out... Oh, that was a bad injury.
Yeah, well, a few weeks ago when they faced Richmond, I can recall the match, and they were pretty competitive up until half time, and I thought they may have put on a bit of a show, but just in the second half they just absolutely died, and the scoreboard really reflected that.
I think it's just about playing 4 consistent good quarters. Like against Richmond, they were pretty good. It was just that 1/3 quarter when Fremantle just rolled them, kicked goal after goal after goal, and
yeah,
by the time the margin was just out, and then they just give up.
Yeah, well, that's it. And I think Melbourne. Yeah, last week they weren't bad. I think it wasn't very much they went down by to the Bulldogs, but considering it was Jim Stein's tribute match, I wouldn't have really expected anything less from them, and it was just disappointing they couldn't take the win.
Well, do you think that Jim Stein's passing away has had an influence or an impact on the way they're performing?
Well, I think it certainly should have. Whether it actually has or not, I can't really answer that question, but I know certainly if there was somebody at the club that they looked up to, like Jim Steins, I think it should certainly give them that extra motivation to push, especially later in the game.
I, for one, actually thought it'd really motivate them. I thought it'd get them real pumped up, real excited. I thought it'd really motivate them because he was such a figure down there. He was an inspiration to everybody.
Yeah, well, that's it. I thought the exact same. I thought a couple of matches there, and I thought against Richmond they should have been better than what they were. Not taking anything away from Richmond, but Melbourne definitely need to improve.
That's for sure. What about the Saints?
Oh, they're pretty impressive, the Saints. I think they were rode off a bit last year. They ended up finishing 7th with that late charge. Guys like Goddard, Rewalt, they're still playing good footy. And then you got people, Lenny Hayes was a huge in for them, and I think he'll really help them. And then players like Montagna that are just so quick and can pass the ball off. I think they'll certainly be a top 8 team.
I think they've just got to sort of get that depth, because they've got like the players of Montagna, Dalsano, Hayes, Rewalt, Goddard. They're elite players. They're some of the top players in the whole of the league. I think they've just got to get that consistency and sort of even it out around the pitch and get some of them younger players and not so well known players just sort of lift up a little bit.
Yeah, well, I think St Kilda have got a team of champions, but at the moment they're certainly not a champion team.
Well,
now we have the Lions and the Cats game up at the Gabba.
I wouldn't rule the Brisbane Lions out of this game. Cats haven't been overly impressive.
Yeah, well, certainly not. It's up at the Gabba, and I think they'll certainly favour Brisbane. They're a bit healthier now with Brown back in the squad, and hopefully he'll kick a few goals for them. I certainly wouldn't be writing Brisbane off though.
Well, it'll be Simon Black's 300th game. What a player he has been to them.
Oh, he's been phenomenal. Just when you think age is starting to hinder his performance, he just seems to come out and impress week after week, and I think that's a real reflection of the type of football that he has and always will be.
He'll be an all-time great of the Lions. He'll be an all-time great of the AFL. I've got so much respect for him. He's such a good, hard, honest player.
Yeah, certainly. And just the way he approaches his footy, he's always hard at the ball. He's an absolute expert at the clearances, and I think, he'll go down as one of the greatest, if not one of the best in the AFL.
Yep. Brisbane he played a massive part in their premiership all them years ago.
Yeah, well, he did, and it was part of that premiership along with Jonathan Brown that is still there. I know they lost Jason Ackermanis and Power and a few of those guys, but the two old timers are still there and they're still playing well. So why not continue?
I'd almost call him underrated, I think.
Yeah, well, he does have elements to that. He's sometimes, he does put in that effort, and he probably doesn't really get acknowledged. He's not that type of midfielder that presses and kicks a lot of goals, but in terms of the amount that he sets up, he certainly doesn't seem really acknowledged for that enough.
One for the Cats, they really haven't got as good as they have been in the past seasons this year.
Yeah, well, they're missing a few players. I mean, the thing that's impressed me about Geelong is their sustained success and their ability to continue to play good footy year after year, and I'm definitely not going to ride them off like I didn't last year. They rode off, they won the premiership, and I certainly wouldn't be surprised if they did it again this year.
I think their midfielders have to start kicking goals. Like, Selwood hasn't kicked very many. I think Chapman's only kicked 2 for the whole season.
Yeah, well, Chapman hasn't been in fine form like he was last year, and there's probably various reasons as to why that is, but the thing that's impressed me about Geelong is their ability to continue to get young players coming in that are quality footballers.
I think these will be the seasons that will really test Chris Scott and see if he's up to it or not, because he's won a premiership, but he did have one of the best squads currently in the AFL, so if he can keep this squad still going so strong and bringing in and introducing young players whilst the older players slowly drop off, he'll go down as a great coach.
Well, that's it. I mean, they've introduced guys like Menzel and Vardy. I know Vardy's injured at the moment. Trent West, Christensen, who's he's so quick. He's another Matthew Stokes in the making. But there's certainly that's the thing that surprised me about Chris Scott. He continues to put these quality players in. You wonder how they get them with the higher draft picks.
He's got to give the recruiting managers some credit. They've brought in some bloody good players over the years.
They have, and like I said, sustained success, and that's why they wouldn't have had the higher draft picks, but to do the best with what they've got, Geelong certainly deserve the credit for that.
Then we have West Coast and Richmond to face off at the MCG.
Well, Tigers went bad last week.
No, they weren't bad, and I think Richmond are at that point where it's really do or die. It's time to step up. I know they can do it. I know they've got the players to do it, but it's just a question as to whether they will or not. I think Damien Hardwick's done a sensational job in reforming the squad, but I think really Richmond will be disappointed this year if they don't get that finish in the 8, but certainly are improving.
I think if they do want to take that next step, they have to start turning the honourable and respectable losses into wins.
Yeah, well, I mean, like they did against Geelong, I think they lost by about 10 or 9 points. And I mean,
it was 10.
That's a game that they certainly really could have stepped up and knock off Geelong. It would have given them all the confidence in the world. And I mean, that's just disappointing. They just couldn't quite finish as strongly as they would have liked.
Yeah, well, they're only Geelong. They just locked them down, kept it in their half, and yeah, they're just old heads. They just know what to do in those times against the young and inexperienced Tigers.
Yeah, well, they did it against Hawthorn, and that's just a testament to Geelong and how good they actually are.
Yep. So now we'll have the Swans and Hawthorn game.
Yeah, it should be an interesting one. This one, they're both very good sides, very good defensive pressure by both of them. It's the only reason I'm tending to sway towards Hawthorn is that they're over in Tasmania, and I don't think they've lost there in the last, certainly not this season. But I think they'll just be a little bit too strong. Although take no credit away from Sydney, I think they've got one of the best defensive sort of presses in the competition, and the way they lock the ball in is just sensational.
Tell you one Sydney player I really like is Josh Kennedy.
Yeah, he's pretty impressive, Kennedy, and they've got a lot of guys like that. Just that hard ball gets, and those guys that just put their head below knees and just go for the footy, and it's really a testament to Sydney's strong characters.
Yep. Well, that rounds up our sort of predictions on the games. Well, our thoughts and opinions on all of the games this weekend. So we'll sort of move on into the discussions now. Earlier we were talking about the Giants and the Suns. Both have gone down different paths, with Gold Coast picking up some bigger names with the likes of Ablett, Brennan and Riscatelli and Bach. Whereas the Suns have gone for youth and brought in a couple of old heads like Power and Corns, who will just fill in the gaps and bring some much needed leadership and experience. Who guys do you think will win out of these two, who do you think will win a premiership first? Gold Coast or GWS?
Well, I think Gold Coast have had that advantage in that they've had a couple of pre-seasons now, and the bodies are getting stronger, and they're certainly starting to develop. But I'm tending to say GWS. I think what Kevin Sheedy and the coaching staff there have done, they've got a heap of young kids. They've turned them into good footballers. I know they're probably going to face a lot of tough losses towards the rest of the year, but I'm just impressed with the way they do that contested ball and the way they play.
What about you, Clint? I think our poor old Clint's about to have a sneeze. Well, I reckon the Suns will win a premier. Bless you. I think the Suns will win a premiership first.
Yeah, well...
no, GWS, sorry.
Yeah, it is an arguable point, but I think GWS just have that knowledge behind them, and with guys like Kevin Sheedy, one of the best, if not one of the greatest AFL coaches of all time there, he knows footy, he knows it inside out, and he knows how to get these young players capable of winning a premiership, as he's won so many in his career.
I think the youth, going down the way of the youth's a much better way anyway, because yes, he's going to be bad regardless if you get 5 more top picks than the other team. He's both going to have a couple of rough years, but short-term pain, long-term game. So, what were you going to say, Clint?
Well, GWS, my tip is for the first flag out of them 2 teams. But one thing I wasn't really happy with, Jonathan Giles from Port Adelaide got delisted by Mark Williams, and now Mark Williams is right-hand man for Kevin Sheedy and recruits him as a mature age.
That is true. He's a very good player. He's had a
great run during the year, and yeah, he's going to be an absolute gun for it.
Yeah, and I think another thing about Mark Williams, I remember back in the 2004 Premiership, so many people going on about the fact that Port were going to choke, and he had a young team back then, and I think he can certainly do the same with GWS, and maybe show that the infamous character of himself choking him with the tie.
Well, they've got 2 of the best men in the country up there, Williams and Sheedy. Both exactly know how to win a premiership. Both coaches have done it.
Yeah, well, that's it. Both coaches are premiership coaches, and I think that's a disadvantage in Gold Coast. Don't get me wrong, I take my hat off to Guy McKenna. I like his work ethic and the way he goes about it, but he just hasn't got that knowledge behind him yet.
Yeah, he's not a bad manager, but a coach, but I don't know. It's hard to seem a good coach when you compare to likes of Williams and Sheedy.
Yeah, well, both of the teams picked up a rugby player in Hunt and Israel Folau. How do you think they'll go? How do you think they'll be?
Well, I've got to admit, Hunt has been impressive as of late. I have liked how he's been playing. He's been playing really well, and I think Folau scored his first goal on the weekend. I think he'll be very good, if not better than Hunt.
Yeah, well, I was really impressed in that game against Essendon, the Gold Coast, the way they stepped it up, and I think that charge was ultimately led by Carmichael Hunt. Let's be honest, he's not the most talented footballer, he's certainly not the fastest, but the way he puts in, the way he challenges the ball and goes for it, and I think he's one of the best tacklers in the competition, probably due to his background in rugby, but he certainly will be a good player. As for Israel, he's sort of started off, he's struggling at the moment, he sort of fumbles around with the footy, but he'll get better as time goes on.
Yep.
Do you think that more players will make the switch from rugby to AFL after seeing Folau and Hunt make the switch?
Well, I think it's possible.
Yeah, it is certainly possible, although looking at the other side to it, I certainly don't think the fact that Carmichael Hunt, when he started in the VFL, was coming off every 5 minute getting massages, I don't know if that would necessarily give them a focus to go to the AFL, but it's certainly something that the AFL is looking for, and they're trying to become more prominent in New South Wales and Queensland, and I think that's the way they're going to go about it.
Well, I think they're at the perfect clubs because they're both developing as players, and the clubs that are at are also developing, and field of players developing. So they're with other people in similar positions.
Yeah, well, exactly, and these clubs are going to make a lot of mistakes, and that's just the part of the game, and I think as long as they learn from them and they keep working hard, I think a premiership's not too many years away.
Well, I think it's fair to say most people would have had Gold Coast and GWS in the bottom two this season, especially so early on in the season. I don't know about you guys, but did you expect Melbourne to be doing much better than what they currently are?
Oh, I thought they would be better than what they are. It has, I must admit, it has surprised me. I certainly wasn't thinking they'd be a top 8 team or anything like that, but I thought they should have probably had been better against Richmond. I know they've faced a few top 4 teams, but that's no excuse for the type of margins that's been chucked down their throat.
Now it's time for us to have our new segment called Good Call, Bad Call. What we will do is good to get our listeners to send us in something that they think could happen, and we say if we think it was a good call or bad call. Since this is our first week and we didn't have many people who knew about us, we've got one of our good mates from school to send in some calls and talk to us about the game.
Well, we tried to get him to call up, but unfortunately at work, so he just gave us a few little questions. I just wrote them down. His first question Essendon will make the top 4. Good call or bad call, Clint?
Not a bad call. Well, Essendon have shown pretty good form over the last 5 weeks. 4 wins, 1 loss. If they keep that up for the rest of the year, they should not be missing the top 4.
Yeah, well, this is definitely probably my favourite question out of the 5. Look, you got teams like Carlton and Hawthorn, West Coast that you think are probably certain. I think Bombers will be around that 4 to 6 mark. One thing I've really thought, if they can get some key players back in Dempsey and Winderlick, they're just so important to their style of play, and I think if they can get those guys back in, James Hurd's been great, he's turned the club around, and hopefully their efforts will be reflected. And I mean, winning 4 games and going down by a point to the reigning grand finalist in Collingwood, certainly not a bad start to the year.
Will West Coast win the premiership in season 2012?
I'm going to get a good call. I think they've got a very good list. Strong midfield, strong defence. One of the top forward lines in the AFL. So hard to match up on. Like Clint and Lynch, Kennedy, Darling, and then you've got Cox and Natanui who rest down forward to deal with. What sort of players can deal with? Not many teams have a back line that's tall enough and good enough to deal with all them players.
Yeah, well, that's true, and like you said, they've got one of the best forward line in the competition. It's scary to think that they're actually missing 2 of their best forwards in Lacroix. And
That's true.
And I mean, imagine how stronger they would be if they were actually playing. Although I know Lacroix won't play the rest of the season, so I won't be going on too much about him. But I don't know about West Coast. I'm a bit on the fence. I don't think they'll lose a game over in Subiaco this year, or Patterson's as it's now referred to. But I think when it comes to those games in Melbourne, I don't know whether they'll necessarily be strong enough there to be capable of being the premiers.
Well, I think that will be a thing they'll play a big part in. Obviously, if they're playing somebody like Collingwood at the MCG, obviously they've got a really big disadvantage.
Yeah, well, it is a huge disadvantage, but I suppose we've got to weigh up as well the huge disadvantage that Victorian teams have to face going over there, and the huge difference in temperature. But I think that John Worsford he's won a premiership with them before, and he can certainly do it again. I wouldn't write him off, but I just don't think they're quite there yet.
Well, now we're going to move on to our final segment today, which is where each of us will make a big call. Not one that many people agree with us on, but a bold prediction. Maybe one day we could just get them right. Nick, what's your big call for today?
Well, going back to that question before, I think Essendon will make the top four. It's probably a bit subjective. I'm an Essendon supporter myself. Probably a little bit influenced there, but I think the way they've gone about the footy, they've got key players that have had the talent there. It's been worked on over the pre-season. Hurd's come in the last 2 years. He's turned the club around, and with Bomber behind him, I think it should be enough for a top four finish this year.
Well, my big call is GWS to get Israel Folau 15 goals by the end of the year.
Yeah, well, Carmichael Hunt only scored one, didn't? Or, I'm not exactly sure, but it wasn't very much.
Yeah, well, I think we'll all remember that goal that Carmichael Hunt scored.
Great
I think
goal
it was,
that
I
was.
think it was from 60-something metres out. It was definitely a huge boot, and yeah, I think just the one goal for him last year.
Well, my big call is that the Swans will just miss out on playing in the Premiership this year. I reckon they've got a very well balanced, good, well coached team, and I reckon we could see them making a prelim.
Yeah, well, they're a bit of a dark horse, the Swans. They're not really much talk about, but they've certainly been a top 8 team in the last couple of years. I think the veterans in Goods and McVeigh and those type of guys, they perform week in and week out, and they certainly help the younger kids there. And I certainly wouldn't write off Sydney for making the prelim final.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to our first ever show. Stay tuned, as this is just the first time any of us have ever done anything like this. So please subscribe, keep listening, thanks, and we'll see you next week.